1964. Most people I know don't remember it.
Come on.
So you have to be loyal. You have to. There's a solidarity that the whole Rust Belt kind of people have, right? Detroiters go Lions. See, there you go. Exactly. Go well. You know, now and in the early '90s, not early '90s, '80s, I went to Wings games where the Joe Louis was empty. We're not yet at our time yet, so I'm just covering it. Well, yeah, I mean, so, you know, you support your team because it's your team.
So does Karina bring you in for her team?
The Tigers have come back, but the Tigers have had tough times too.
Triple Crown.
Here we go. I'm from Cleveland, remember that. Well, now you think about this. I'm a big hockey fan, right? So the closest NHL team to me, and I go to games, the Columbus Blue Jackets, the worst team in the NHL. There you go. It is, yes, and Wings territory. Hey, I gotta do that. Yeah, I'm well aware of that. So, are we about to our starting point? Are we ready to start? You guys ready? You guys want to get started? Yep. All right. I'm Alan White, practice manager with Upsearch. We're a consulting firm. Justin Caldicott from Redgate. Did I pronounce it correctly?
Yes, exactly right. Well done.
Excellent. Excellent. He's got that nice English accent that makes it sound so special. So anyway, I'm Alan White, and I've got a challenge for you, and a couple of you in the room have heard this from me before, but it still bears repeating. There is not a single person in this room that doesn't have knowledge that the rest of us can learn from. Said positively, I can learn from each one of you in this room. And I'm going to ask you to think about the things that you're passionate about, the things that make you want to go to work each day. Put those together, put it together into a presentation, and go to your local user group and get up there and talk about it. Because everybody in your group is going to learn, but you're going to learn even more about it because you have to know more about a subject when you present than if you're just using it every day. So you'll help yourself, you'll help the rest of us, and this is how we build our community. We've got a great community in the SQL Server. I hope you all realize between the SQL Saturdays, the Redgate SQL in the City, all of the various events that go on, we've got a wonderful, amazing community that didn't exist even 5 years ago. It wasn't this strong. And so you're all a part of that, and I'd like you to help contribute to that. That said, let's move on. Turn on clicker. All right, there is out there at various tables a white paper that this guy wrote about the automated deployment tool, the deployment manager, that is brilliant. I was reading it on the plane coming here. I've used it for reference in working with Justin to put together the presentation. So please download it or pick up a hard copy out there. Also, those little Redgate, I don't think I have it with me, the little Redgate USB sticks, they've got it on there as well. All right, so get it, read it, it's good. I'm going to start with our traditional deployment. How many of you guys are DBAs? How many of you are developers? Okay, wow, it's almost even. So I like developers, I really do. And I'm telling you, as a DBA, your DBA likes developers too. We don't like some of the things that developers do, like using Table Designer to make database changes. Okay? It's a bad thing. Don't do it. Don't do it.
I've got that in my demo later.
Excellent. Excellent. He is a developer, I said. So developers will use Table Designer to make changes to the database. And then they're going to use the application and go through an iterative process of developing that application, making changes so that everything works. By the way, guys, there are plenty of seats down here. Come sit. You don't have to stand through this whole thing. I couldn't stand it, I don't know how you can. So you cycle through those steps until you get it right. And then you send an email to the DBA saying, make the production database look like my development one. Really? And yeah, it happens, okay? Copy the files from the development server and make the database changes to the production database. Guys see problems with that? Right? Oh, it's not consistent. It's certainly not repeatable, right? It takes a lot of time to figure out what changes were made in that database. All kinds of errors. Okay, how many guys know that I talk a lot about PowerShell? Yeah, a few of you. Right, just a little bit, all right? One of the reasons I do PowerShell is because it's repeatable, it's scriptable, it's repeatable. I don't have to make those mistakes of clicking the right checkbox, right? That deployment, it's a single point of failure, right? And who knows what I'm doing? I mean, I know what I'm doing. Does my boss know that I'm doing it right? Maybe, maybe not. He's trusting me, and you know, obviously he has to. I'm a DBA, he better trust me. Right? I've got control of the data. Well, Redgate came up with this really great tool called SQL Compare. And so now instead of looking at the data objects, I can use a tool that examines those data objects and says, there's differences here, there's differences there, there's differences here. And it even goes a step further, and I can then connect to my production database and go, make those changes there. Do we see potential problems with that too? I mean, it's a great tool, but we have potential problems doing that. So, we have another great tool from Redgate called SQL Source Control. And now I can manage all of my changes through source control. I can easily script those, but even that can get me into some trouble. And it can be time consuming, all right? And depending on whose version of the database I'm talking to, and I might have multiple clients running similar code that might be at different release levels, and I have to make sure I know what release level they're at to know which script to run to bring them up to the current level, it gets tedious. So I'm going to pass on to Justin, who's developed this wonderful tool called Deployment Manager.
Thank you. So yeah, firstly I'm going to try and be as entertaining as Alan.
Oh, sorry.
But I probably won't succeed. So the scripts folder, I wanted to talk about this a little bit. This is what SQL Source Control is using in the background. So this is the on-disk representation of your database that SQL Source Control uses to put inside your Subversion or your TFS, your version repository. And I'm calling out now because it's important. This is a building block that we use later on to form part of our database packages that we're going to look at. And it has not just the schema, but if anyone knows the SQL Source Control tool that we have, it can also manage the static data that you have, any reference data, things like that. And another nice thing is you can actually, if you use SQL Compare, then you can use this as a base for your deployment. So you can deploy from a scripts folder, so from effectively the checked-in source of truth, rather than a database that may have maybe we changed something, we forgot to check it in, and we don't want to go from there. We want to go straight from source control and deploy to our probably not production, right? Hey, I'm a developer.
Yeah, we don't need that.
So we've got that base. And now, so we're sort of talking about, we're sort of building up the levels of automation that you could go for. And so now I'm going to look at how to use SQL Compare, but from the command line. We're going to use a bit of PowerShell for this. Has anyone used SQL Compare's command line before? Not that many. Okay, well, hopefully this will be fairly educational then. Right. So, if I step across to PowerShell here, so here's a script I made earlier.
Oh my God.
Oh, he's seen it, he's seen it.
Do you believe what he's doing there? How many guys spot it? Real quick.
It's gone.
Yeah. You gotta say password in the script. Come on, Justin.
As I said, I'm a developer. Okay. So be that as it may, a essentially what this script is trying to do is it's going to build up, so we have some variables at the top here, obviously username and password, but also we have a database name, server name, and we have various properties. And what we're doing is we're building up the various arguments that we need to pass to the SQL compare command line. So you can see we have a scripts folder, so this is the scripts folder on disk as I was just showing you earlier. And we have the destination server we're going to deploy to, and the database name. And most importantly, we have the sync command. And what this does is it tells SQL Compare's command line, instead of making as a script, to actually deploy these changes directly. So do it straight away. And so we've built up these arguments, and we go down here, and this is where we simply call the SQL compare command line with these arguments. So fairly straightforward. And so I'm going to demonstrate this. So if I first of all need to look at this folder, and we can see, so here's the PowerShell script we were just looking at, and it's referencing in here, and this is the scripts folder that I was just showing. So this is the one that the PowerShell script is referencing.
Kind of looks like Object Explorer, doesn't it?
And if I step across to Management Studio, then I'm going to make, just to prove that this is working, I'm going to make a new database, and let's call it widget simple. Did I type that right? Yes. Okay. So it's completely empty. I mean, that's not strictly true. It's got no user tables, and we've got some default roles in there. But if I now go to my PowerShell and run my PowerShell, then so what SQL Compare is doing is it's the same process it does when the user interface is ran. So it's registering the data sources. That means building an in-memory object model of your database, so of the scripts folder and of the database you're deploying to, not the production box. And we're building a list of all of the differences. So you can see down the bottom, as it's going, it's outputting all of the differences that it sees. So it says we need to put these store procedures over, and these default roles are there on both. And as it's doing that, so it's also making the script, and it's going to run the script for us. And there we go. So if it exits with code 0, that means it worked fine. So, but let's go and make sure. Minimize it down, refresh. And so we have all the tables and store procedures. So that's a brief example. What do you think of that?
Excellent. All of a sudden, you've made my job a little bit simpler, but I know you can do more.
Really? Well, it's a good job I prepared some more slides there, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, so is anybody familiar with the continuous integration tools that we're sort of putting together, the various add-ins for the continuous integration service? Let's have one hand. Okay, so I should probably tell you a little bit about that. We have, so basically continuous integration helps for application code, has been used for quite a while, and it helps to provide additional testing and validation. So, but for databases, it's not really been used, right? I mean, is anyone using CI for their database here in the room? One. Yeah. Two. That was two. Okay. So essentially, the things that that can do, so the testing that it can help with, is you can make the creation script for your database. You can run it, make sure it's fine. You can also make an upgrade script and actually test the upgrade script is working. You can test that you're not going to lose any data. That's quite nice.
No, it's critical.
As I said.
I should have brought my DBA hat, right? So DBA. Oh no, what the one that said Steve's got his in the back. Excellent. No, one of the sessions that Microsoft did with the DBA's hat just says no.
I should have a hat with yes on it.
Oh, yes.
So, what else can it do? So, has anyone heard of T-SQL-T? A few, okay. So, T-SQL-T is an open source framework that helps with unit testing for databases. So, it helps you write store procedures that can test your database. And so the continuous integration, not only can it test the upgrade scripts and things like that, but it can also actually run the unit tests as well. So you can get a good degree of, you can be very sure that your database is in a good state. So we have, for Team City, we have an add-in which tries to make it nice and easy. That's what we're looking at here. But for other CI systems...
Explain to the DBAs in the room basically what Team City does, if you would, because as DBAs, we don't really worry about those collaborative type tools. So if you would.
What is Team City? All right. So Team City is an implementation of a continuous integration server. And so all the benefits that I was talking about before, that's what a CI server will try and provide. But more than that, it's somewhere that the whole team can go and have a look at how our projects are doing. Are they working correctly? So everyone's got that visibility.
Great, thank you.
That's what they're trying to do. And so we also have, in addition to the add-in for Team City, whether you use is anyone using Jenkins by any chance? That's another quite popular. No? Well, yeah. Okay. Not that popular, obviously. Yeah, so the idea is whichever CI system you're using, we've got some scripts which help you integrate all of the functionality that we're providing into that as well. And the output of all of this, so in addition to all that testing, is a package. So it outputs a package with all of the changes for your database and the database structure necessary to actually do the deployment. But I won't go into any detail on that just now. So, who's at the keynote? I was there. Okay, so we've seen a little bit of this already. But essentially, if I figure out my zooming thing, there we go. We can see we've got development, testing, staging, and production. And we've got our projects down the side. And we can see which versions of the software that we have in each of these environments. So this is the dashboard of Deployment Manager. And it's kind of like the equivalent to a CI system, but for deployment, to help you automate the deployment. So there are various ways you can make the deployments. You can do it from within inside the UI, so I can click on these badges. This is just a screenshot, but we'll see it in action later. But I can click on the badges to do a deployment, or you can automate it. So if you're familiar with is anyone familiar with the term continuous deployment? And the ideas and what it's trying to do? Cool. So the idea being that you don't necessarily need to continuously deploy your software to your customers. Some people do, but you don't need to. What you can do is you can have a shared environment that the whole team can get to, and you can continuously deploy to that, or any sort of varying levels on top of that. But what's nice about that is it means the whole team has got somewhere to go and just see, hey, I want to go and see the latest version of our software, try it out. Well, I'll check in my changes, and 10 minutes later, there'll be a version there ready to use. So that's one of the other approaches. So you can automate the deployment of that. You don't have to do it by hand. The other point to mention is that it's not just for SQL Server databases. It's for ASP.NET websites. It's for any component that you can write a PowerShell script for, basically. How does it work? Well, there are two components. There's the server, so you install the server, it has the web UI that we just saw, it has a service that runs, and you have the agent component. And the agent is installed onto whichever server that you want to deploy to. Now,
so that means I have to install the agent on all of my target servers?
You're panicking now, aren't you?
I am. This concerns me. I got yet another piece of code that's running on a server.
All right, well in that case I better tell you that you don't have to do that. Okay. So for websites, obviously you don't have any way of connecting in and deploying remotely. So you need to install the agent onto the machine that has access to the website. But for databases, well, we can connect. So as long as the machine can connect to your databases, then it's fine to install the agent on there.
Excellent.
Is that better?
Much.
Okay, good. In terms of how it works, so we have the Deployment Manager server in the middle. So this is all about packages, right? So everything goes in, is formed as a package. So do you like our logo? So we kind of try to pick something relevant, a little circular spinny disk and some arrows, move these packages around. So we start by pulling the packages from the package repository, and this can be for your database or your website. We could say have two packages coming down for those. And then they form a release inside Deployment Manager, and we then push them onto the machines that we want to deploy to, or to handle the deployments for us. And when they're there, they're unpacked, and then they're deployed. So I thought at this stage, probably good to give you a quick look around the tool, because too many slides is never a good thing. Okay, so here's the dashboard. So I've got an example later that I'm going to show an end-to-end demo, and it's all about a widget shop. And this is our widget shop. Doesn't it look nice? It's actually the ASP.NET example page, just a little bit tweaked. And with some data in it as well. So we've got a database and we've got a website. So I've got this configured inside of Deployment Manager. So you can see I've got my 4 environments, pretty common, and I've got the different versions in these different environments. But if I have a look at the environment screen, so I can see how I can actually arrange the different environments. So this is a really simple example. So we've got one machine inside each environment, but I could quite easily put, if I've got a web farm, I can put in multiple machines in here, add machine, and so on. So we can set up our environments like that. Our projects, let's have a look at the widget shop project. So this is an overview, and you can see the various bits of information about which versions are in which environments, recent deployments, one failed there. And we can have a look at the steps that make up the project. So in this case, I mentioned we've got a database and we've got an application. And these steps represent package deployments. So we have a package for the database and a package for the web application. And if I go in, this is where I can customize for those machines that I've added to those environments, because I've done that in a very generic sense. For this project, which machine should I be deploying to? So this screen is where you make that connection. And another screen that's really important to show is obviously we've got these different environments, but we've got lots of different information when you specify per environment. Production has a different database to staging, staging different to testing. So there are various settings we want to pass into the process, such as my
essay.
Yeah. But also, we have website name, for example, has been customized for development, testing, staging, and the same as the database name. So these are all running on the local box, but obviously you can configure these. The important part to mention about variables is that these are passed into the PowerShell. So these variables here essentially become PowerShell variables that you can use to customize what happens in the deployment process.
You guys realize that PowerShell is part of Microsoft's common engineering criteria, and Microsoft expects all server products to support PowerShell fully, and it's awesome that Redgate's doing just that.
He's excited.
I am, I can't help it.
Mr. PowerShell. Okay, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about something called NuGet. Has anyone heard of NuGet?
Yeah, it goes in candy bars.
Delicious.
Or a chicken NuGet. Yeah, sorry.
Is there a Scottish version of that?
Maybe.
I guess nuggets, I don't know.
So what is NuGet? NuGet is a standard that allows you to, a standard for packages. Basically, NuGet packages are essentially zip files, nothing fancy, but they also have some metadata in there as well. They have a bit of XML that describes what's the version number, who produced this package, who's the author, these kinds of things. But it's also a standard that Microsoft are supporting. So there are a lot of existing tools that we can make use of. So there are 2 package repositories that Microsoft have created. So we get those, you can use those for free. It's also nice because some CI systems are building in support for it. So TeamCity, for example, has built in a NuGet package repository, so you don't have to set up an additional component if you're using TeamCity. So it's good like that, but also there are other third-party tools, things that help you exploring packages, and various things like that. So that's NuGet. Was that a fairly clear explanation?
It was for me. How about you guys? Okay, cool.
Good, good. And so how do packages work inside Deployment Manager? So we have NuGet packages, but we also have the use of PowerShell. So basically the idea here is that if you can write some PowerShell, then to deploy the component you want, then it can be deployed using Deployment Manager. That is the idea. So what kinds of components might we want to deploy? Well, I mentioned ASP.NET websites, SQL Server databases.
SSIS packages?
Yeah.
I know, I'll tell you what, I have a client and I'm regularly deploying SSIS packages. I have to copy the directory from the development server to the next level up and then deploy that package from there. I have to go into the configuration file and make the changes for the target database, the target server name. I have to do the deployment after, of course, I've already done the database update. So when I started looking at the deployment manager tool, I thought, oh, this is going to solve my problems. Except all of the documentation says web application and database. So how did we solve that?
How do we solve it? Well, so with the PowerShell, if you can write a script to do it, then obviously you can automate it using Deployment Manager.
Excellent.
There you go. So actually we've got a BI team at Redgate. It's a fairly small team, but we're really starting to look into this area. And one of the next things they're going to be looking at is writing a white paper. So similar to the white paper we have that talks about SQL Server, write the equivalent for the BI stack and try and help with all those components as well. So that's where we're going.
Sweet.
Are there any Oracle users in the room as well?
One brave man.
So the reason why I ask is that so we've got an equivalent now for SQL Compare for Oracle, but also we're working on a version of SQL Source Control for Oracle, and that's not just a plug. That is important for Deployment Manager because what that solves is it solves making that scripts folder that we saw earlier. So once we have that scripts folder, once we can take the database and put it on disk, then, or the schema, not the entire thing, obviously, then what we can do is we can put that inside a package and we can roll that out. So basically we're trying to bring Oracle into this story as well. So if you have the two, then great. I also wanted to mention about web applications. Deployment Manager in many ways, I guess, is focused a little bit more on web application deployment at the moment. I think it's fair to say. So there is a special case inside the tool so that you don't need to write any PowerShell in order for it to automatically update IIS, extract the contents of the package, update IIS to point to those new files. And is anyone using or familiar with web deploy? A few, okay. So web deploy has this concept where you can transform the web.config file, so any connection strings to the database, various other settings like that, that need to be configured on a per environment basis. You can have a web config transform, and so we have exactly the same mechanism in Deployment Manager, so it makes it really easy to do that kind of thing. So that was just a little bit on web application packages. So the next thing, no, it's very similar. But the next thing we're going to show is the PowerShell script that we saw earlier. I'm going to take that and I'm basically going to turn it into a package. So let's have a look at how we do that. So we were looking at the folder earlier that had our deployed PowerShell script and had our database folder with the scripts folder inside. So also in this folder that I didn't show you before, and that's opened up on the other screen, is the XML metadata, which I explained that NuGet uses. And so basically, there's loads of things in here, but the important parts, and I don't know why they called it ID, but this is basically the name of the package. And it has the version. So I've got 1.0, let me zoom in. I've got version 1.0 of my widget shop database package. That's what I'm going to create. So I have that. I also have the NuGet command line. So the NuGet command line can be used for various tasks. It can be used for creating packages. It can be used for publishing packages up to the package repository. In this instance, I'm going to use it to create the package. But I'm going to make one change to my PowerShell first. So I mentioned on the variables screen that you can pass in the variables into the PowerShell script. So very handy then that I put all things like my SA password at the top here. So I can
You know PowerShell supports multi-line comments, don't you?
Really?
We'll talk about it later.
Yeah. So comment those out, And now that they're commented out, instead, when this script is ran as part of the deployment process, the variables defined in the deployment manager software will be passed in to the PowerShell. So I've saved this now, and if I run, I'll have a look at previously run commands. If I zoom in. So this is just running the NuGet command line, telling it to pack, and telling it to pack my new spec file. And basically it will take that file and all the contents of the folder that file lives in, and make the package. So if I go ahead and run it, done. So now that it's done, let's have a look. And there it is, ta-da, our first NuGet package. And obviously we can have a look inside. And that's opened up over here too. And it really is just exactly what was in that folder, but with a few additional bits of metadata that's created during the packaging process. So this package is now ready. It can go into Deployment Manager and be pushed out to our servers. But I'm not going to do that. We're going to talk a little bit about, so as part of that script, what were we doing? Quick recap. We were calling SQL compare and we were telling it to please deploy my changes now. But that's not really ideal. Maybe great for development and testing, right? Even as a developer, I know that. But for a production or staging environment, you really need a few extra things. So you need the ability to review the scripts that you're going to run. You need to have the confidence that you're testing not just your software, but you need to know you're testing the upgrade process at each stage. So if we can run the same upgrade script on every single server as it makes its way towards production, that would be great. But if we're doing that, there are a few other things that we can do. So if we have an upgrade script, it's going to assume the database is in a certain state. It's going to assume various things. And we can use SQL compare again to actually validate these. So we can say, hey, let's make sure we're in exactly the right state before we make any changes at all, before we run that script. And we can also validate afterwards as well. So we can make sure the upgrade script has actually done the right thing. And obviously, if you're validating at the start, it's really nice to be able to say, hey, at this point we can fail. It's not exactly as we wanted, it's drifted a little bit, we know the upgrade script isn't going to work, we can stop right there.
So if we have multiple targets that are at different levels, this static script is going to check to see what level it is and apply the appropriate changes, as opposed to the scenario I talked about earlier, where I had to look and see what my target looked like, what version it was, and then apply a certain set of scripts to bring it up. This solution is going to do all that automatically. Yes, I pronounced that correctly.
So the other thing that's probably worth mentioning as well is that, so what would be really nice is to have one package that we know we can send to any customer, any site that we have, and make the same deployment. You don't want to have one package for some customers, one package for another set of customers, and so on. So the idea here is that you can include all of the upgrade scripts, so all of the required information to deploy to any of the customers, or any sites, or so on. How does it work? So I've got a diagram which explains the logic that we're putting inside these database packages. So it covers the two different scenarios that we're talking about. If we want to do, so we can choose this for each environment. We can specify in the variables, hey, I want you to do a dynamic upgrade. And if we do that, it'll come down here and then do exactly what we've done before. Otherwise, if we've configured it to use the static method, we can then do the pre-validation, we can use SQL CMD to run the script, and then we can do the post-validation to make sure everything's okay. So, I'm going to have a quick look now at our CI server as we've got it set up. So, we have TeamCity configured to use the add-in that I was talking about that helps bring the database into CI. So, if I look here, so we've got 5 tests passed. These are the unit tests. And I can have a look at the artifacts. So I'm just going to click on this. And we can expand into, this is the NuGet package that was outputted automatically at the end of the last build of our CI system for the database project. And we can go in here and we can see all the various things it's got. So it's got the same DB folder that we'd seen before. and it's got the scripts folder in here. So this is the current structure of the database. But we can also see down the bottom, we've got the upgrades folder. And so we can see, we know we can, if we see version 0.14, obviously a very early version, of our database, then we can choose this upgrade script to run. And we can use this scripts folder to validate. So this is how it does the validation. It needs to have the state of the previous version in there in order to be able to actually do the comparison and the validation. And then we have our PowerShell script. And this PowerShell script is a little bit more intricate than the previous script that we wrote. If I go across here, we can have a look. But it's not that complicated. So there are various things that are happening. We're setting some variables, we're setting various parameters. We're defining a function that does a validation. So this is essentially making sure that the database is in the required state, and we call this later. We have the ability to specify the mode I mentioned, whether it be dynamic, static. You can also tell it to create new, so it could create a database from scratch. Or we can do the upgrade. If we're telling it to do the upgrade method, then we can see if we've got an upgrade script. Let's do the pre-deployment validation. Let's do the deployment. And again, this is just running the script using SQL CMD. And do the post-deployment validation. And the final thing, if we're doing a dynamic upgrade, then it will just do basically the same logic that we had before. So not a very scary script. It's fairly straightforward, but it does some really interesting things, and it allows us to deploy the database in a really nice way. So now, next demo. So let me have a drink of water.
Earlier I mentioned that I'd like you to come out and present to your local user groups. One really important thing for you to do is have water. Not soda,
Yeah.
water, because your voice will dry out.
I did try
Trust me
that.
on this.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm now going to show effectively an end-to-end demo. So I'm going to make a change, and it's going to be a database change, and it's going to be an application change. And we're going to see that change propagate through to our testing environment. So let me start off with a database. So Management Studio, and we find widget development. So on this system I have a local development database as well that I'm working on. And this has been linked to SQL Source Control, which is hence why it's got the green database icon. So now I did mention earlier that I had a section in my demo that used the
DBAs, close your eyes.
designer.
This is going to be ugly.
Yes.
Blasphemer.
What is this new tool?
So I'm not going to care about the data type either.
Why
It can be
start
the price
now?
of expensive
Demo mode,
objects,
demo
it's
mode,
fine.
demo mode.
But what we can see is we can see these little blue blobs. And what these mean is that SQL Source Control has spotted that we've made a change. So we can go across to the Commit tab. It will look for what's changed. And it's noticed, and we've also got the changes down the bottom. Let's bring that up. We can see it's spotted that I've added the price column. So I can go and say, added price, bucket type. All right, and commit that. And so when I commit that, that change is going to be picked up by our continuous integration system. And it's going to start building, and it's going to run through those various tests, and it's going to build the database package at the end. So you can see it's already picked it up. But while it's running, I'm going to go and make my application change. So something really simple. Let's bring up Visual Studio. And I've got an object model layer here, which is just running a query and putting the results into some objects. So let's add the extra column. And let's also change the home page of the website to say, welcome to Justin and Alan's amazing widget shop. Great. And we can commit these changes as well. So what we've got is an example of I've made a database change, I've made an application change, and the two are dependent on each other. So now if I go back to CI, this is still building. So this is a good opportunity to actually look at the widget shop config, which I haven't talked about yet. So we have a config in CI for the database. This is testing and building our database package. And we have a config for the web application. This is doing exactly the same, but for our website. And we have a widget shop configuration down the bottom. Both of these two, the top two, are set up to trigger the build whenever we check something in. So if I check in a database change, this will build. A website change, this will build. If I go across to widget shop, this is the one that I've configured to run the command line tool that we have for Deployment Manager. So this is the one that triggers the continuous deployment process. So you can see here I'm telling it, hey, Deployment Manager, please create me a release and for this project and deploy it to development. So nice and simple. Go back here. And it's still building. So, Alan, do you want to talk some more?
I'm just absolutely amazed at this whole continuous integration process, and it's really unfortunate in my mind that the continuous integration session is going on down in the main room at this exact same moment. It's unfortunate that the scheduling for that, because this process, to me, is fairly revolutionary in the whole development process, right? Because I know I've worked for companies, for software development companies, where managing multiple releases across multiple clients is a challenge. How many of you guys do this, work for development companies where you have that problem? Do you think this so far, what you've seen so far, is going to help your process and your communication with your people? Yeah, absolutely. Just the idea of this thing picking up those database changes automatically and passing them into the... Now we're looking at it in web application, it says one queued. That's the change that you made and it has to wait
Exactly, yep.
for this process. Why have we gone into overtime?
Overtime.
I feel like this is like the end of a football game and it's the playoffs, right? Yeah.
It's because my database changes were clearly so good.
It was that NCHAR 10.
Yes. This is why.
So I can nip across back to the dashboard, and we can have a quick look. So let's go back to the application, just have a refresh. So this is what it looks like currently in development. Welcome to the widget shop. I've only got these two columns. So by the time I've described that, it's finished. Huzzah. So if we go across to Deployment Manager, so that command line got run after the other build had finished. So you can see now this is turned amber. So this task is being executed. So we're currently deploying the changes to this shared development environment where the whole team can go and have a look. And if I just refresh. So we'll probably put a little spinny icon, I think, on this, because amber doesn't really tell you that it's doing something quite so much.
No, it's not red.
That's true, that is good. Don't say red. Ah, green, say green. And so we go across to the development environment. I've just pressed refresh, and there we are. Changes over here. So both the database and the application changes. And obviously, so that was a continuous deployment, so that's happened after check-in without having to do anything. But I can take the latest release. So let's say our QA team have come along and they want to take the latest version now, and they want to push this to the testing environment. So they can pick that version, and we can deploy it to testing. Go. And it'll do exactly the same as before, as it's doing automatically.
Is the deployment process transactional, whether it succeeds or it fails? What happens if there are errors during the deployment?
So what happens is that we have, so you have the deploy dot, so should I repeat the question?
Please,
so what
please.
happens, I'm not very good at doing that. What happens when is the deployment transactional, and what happens when something goes wrong? So the deploy.ps1 PowerShell script that gets ran, there is also a deploy failed.ps1. So we basically, if something goes wrong, you can run that, and then you can run any custom rollback logic that you need to. But the scripts for the database, they're created by SQL Compare, and they are wrapped in a transaction. And for the website, it extracts the files and switches IIS at the last minute to effectively minimize the amount of things that can go wrong and make it as transactional as possible. Cool.
You remember in the keynote when Justin had to back out that change that got put into production with the wrong picture on the web page, right? And he was able to redeploy the earlier version and it all worked.
Mm-hmm.
So let's look at testing.
I've done it. I've refreshed already. There it is.
Now, again, you guys remember that first slide where I walked you through the process that I lived through as a DBA? You guys living through that right now? How much better is this?
How much time do we have left?
About 15 minutes.
15 minutes, okay. So I'll talk briefly about some of the steps that we've got coming up for Deployment Manager. So one of the questions that we're asked a few times is, can I say for this user of the system, only allowed to deploy to development and testing? At the moment, no. But that will be one of the very next things we work on, and a whole range of extra sort of flexibility around permissions. We'd like to have, so obviously you can write a PowerShell script to deploy, say, a Windows service, but actually we've already done this in our DevOps team, for example. We're using Deployment Manager internally in Redgate in our DevOps team. We've written a few of these scripts already. What we'd like is, obviously we'll put these on the website very soon, but we'd like a website where people can contribute their own scripts and share and sort of vote up and rate and
And like Scripts Manager?
That's a good idea.
All right.
So one of the other things we'd like to do is we'd like to try and make the whole process even easier. So in fact, PowerShell can always be used, but doesn't even need to be used. So for example, for common components, so the website I mentioned has already got a specialization. We'd like to make specializations for various other components and just try and make it as easy as saying, I want to take this SSAS package or SSAS cube and I want to put that over there. So you can just pick from a list. And the other thing is, did you notice on the dashboard the environments go horizontally? So if we start adding extra environments for our different clients or sites, that's going to get pretty wide. So one of the next pieces of work will be to actually allow it to scale in a different dimension effectively. So you could customize, say, I want to see all of the environments. Maybe I've got UAT and production for all of my clients. So we're going to let it sort of scale in that direction. So they're the things we are pretty sure we're doing. Some of these things, I think the database point on the top of this. So the idea is this slide are the things that are slightly less concrete. But I think the top one is pretty concrete. But what we'll be doing is we'll be improving and trying to make even more mature the database support that we have inside Deployment Manager. Has anybody heard of migrations as a part of SQL Compare or SQL Source Control? Does anyone know of that feature?
A few of you.
A couple. Okay. So the idea of this feature is that if you use comparison tools to code for certain kinds of changes, like a rename or a not null column, then they don't always get it quite right. You know, it will see a drop and a create, for example, for the rename. The idea of migrations is that you can insert custom scripts to override certain changes. So I can say, actually, my intention there was to do a rename. And so that script will get picked up as part of the whole process. So that's quite a nice feature. At the moment, that's not supported within this, this tool, but it's something that we'll be looking to add support for. Also to add backups as well at the start of the deployment. So you've always got maybe a snapshot backup or something from a developer as well.
So I mentioned earlier the challenge I have with deploying SSIS packages. One of the things that I brought up to Justin, and how many of you guys know about the feature in PowerShell 2.0 and above called remoting? Few of you. All right. Okay, how many of you guys use RDP to get into your servers to do work? Yeah. Way too many hands there. PowerShell remoting actually allows you to connect to the server with a session that's running on that server. So you're running PowerShell on whatever server you've connected to, and you're working as though you're on that server, and you don't have that 2 login limit like you do with RDP, right? So whomever has to work on that server can all work together to get work done. The other thing you can do is you can say, I want to do this particular amount of work on this group of servers. And you can have 2, you can have a dozen, you can have thousands of servers that you can send this same command or set of commands to, and it'll run them all simultaneously, or as close to simultaneously. I think there's either a 32 or a 64 connection limit to the simultaneous work, but it will batch up and do all this stuff at pretty much the same time across all of these servers. Okay, so this is a really, really powerful feature of PowerShell that they'll be able to then leverage in this process.
Oh,
So you have a question.
L-word.
Can you send different commands to a multiple group?
Can you send multiple different commands to multiple servers? Well, yeah, with 2 different with 2 different sessions, or 2 different 2 different remoting commands. Absolutely, because you're doing different things, right? So, but I mentioned my challenge with the SSIS packages. Does anybody have an issue out here, a problem that we haven't seen how we can address it with this tool yet? Yes, sir. Let me bring the microphone to you. I'm old, so let me hobble back there. Then you can use it, then you can hold the microphone and everybody can hear you.
Thank you very much. I have a issue with version numbers, and I would like if you're able to elaborate a little bit about versioning between the version of the packages and the version of the different components that go within the package. I'll give you an example. Sometimes I'll make a change to the database where the only change is the lookup values. For example, new lookup values that are allowed, but that doesn't necessarily change the web services part of it or the front end. So both versions of the app and the website are compatible with either version of the database. Can you tell me how is that handled in the deployment manager?
Sure. So it probably helps if I go across to Team City and we just see here. So in the case when you've made a database change, maybe to change like the reference data, if that's been linked to SQL source control as well, linked to your source repository as well, then when you make that change and you commit that change, you could set up your continuous integration system to make you a new package for the database. So the database version would be incremented. So as you see, after I made some change, I'm on number 30 now. But the application version wouldn't change. So I've got this configured that only the database config will build if I check in something that's a part of the database.
But
So
can data be part of that configuration change?
Absolutely, yeah. So if you've got static or reference data, you can include that. So it uses the SQL data compare technology as well as part of that.
Right, but the application server will work with either version of the database. It depends on that's a valid scenario.
Okay, so I guess that depends on how you architect your application in terms of whether it's and your database changes, right? Yeah. So.
Okay, I feel like Jerry Springer here. Any other questions?
Yes. Is there any support for deploying without having the client installed? So if we've got customers that we want to get the deployment out to, that we could just have a package that we could just run out there to do the same kind of functionality.
I'm very glad you asked, because that also takes me across to one of the bullet points on the slide.
Sweet.
Nice little segue. Down the bottom, I have a bullet point called disconnected deployment. So, has anybody heard or used a SQL packager before? The Redgate tool, SQL packager? So, basically, that tool is essentially designed to solve the problem that you're talking about, but it doesn't go all the way. If you have clients or sites with different versions of your software, then it doesn't cope with that. So the idea is that we want to integrate SQL Packager, or the idea of that distributed sort of disconnected deployment with Deployment Manager, so that you can take the same packages that you've been building as part of this process and then ship them off on a disk or however you do it to the customer site and then just run them that way. But that'll be coming soon.
Now, don't worry, I can project without the mic. That's not
But
okay.
the recording can't hear it.
Sorry. So, from a previous life experience, I worked for a software company and we had our own install script. because we could show progress and so forth within our installation. How much of an additional integration can you do so you could like add your custom stuff to show a progress message, or I'm creating this, and that sort of stuff?
So the disconnected deployment at the moment, we haven't done that part. But I mean, we could easily imagine taking. So if I show you some of the output that we do have at the moment in the connected model, then we can have a look. Let me pick for this particular. Let me take the most recent deployment here. So we can see down the bottom we've got various logs. We're receiving the packages, uploading packages. Obviously this part wouldn't be relevant on the disconnected, but down the bottom we've got the installation, the details of all the commands run, the output. So yeah, I mean, all the information is being logged inside this system, and as we come to do the disconnected system, we'd be certainly thinking about all those things.
Sir?
So let's take an example. I have 300-400 customers now, and I'm projecting to have over 1,000 in maybe a year or two. I maybe want to stage a deployment, let's say, but my customer logs into the portal and they see like their profile, and I don't want to update my customer and deploy it to my customer. I want to stage it, and my customer deploys it. They can see their different environments of my product, and they can say deploy it to my testing environment. And they test it out. Now they put it in their staging, and then they throw it into production. Is that something where this is going to move, or is this more for just on my side of things, like internal, where I can push it out to them?
So I guess the question would be, does that sound like it's useful to anyone else in the room? Could you put your hand up if it sounds like it's useful to anyone else? Okay, so there's a few. So I mean, obviously, so this isn't something we currently support fully. So within the tool that we have the ability to log in with different credentials. I've just obviously chosen administrator, but you can set up additional users. So you could, once we've done the permissions work that I was talking about earlier, you could quite easily, as long as you can make the server available and you're happy making it available, then you could do that. But it's a use case that we haven't been focusing on right now, but it's definitely something that we can think about.
Because that would save me a ton of money in labor costs.
Yep, for sure.
I was thinking the update package that we talked about, because it has the various versions, you showed the 0.14, you've got all the different versions there of these are what might be out there in the world, and update to this package. And you can create different packages for different releases of your software that each would understand all of the previous versions, so they could select and download maybe the package appropriate to them for their needs. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, who else has got a question, a little challenge for Justin? Because we're still in the early release stage, so we can influence how this thing comes about.
So we've got developers that want a copy of the production database back down in development, and right now there's a couple PowerShell scripts that do it. We could create, with this, you could create different accounts once you get the permissions for the different developers. They can log in, but with SQL, with it using SQL Compare, it's only going to copy the static data down, so those reference tables. Is there another way to get it to copy all of the tables and the data?
All of the transactional data, but the other direction, from production down to the development environment.
Or would I just have to use a PowerShell script and then connect the PowerShell script to this to have it manually run?
Okay, so I guess, this tool is specifically designed to solve the deployment problem. And I guess it's related, but it's not the deployment problem. But interestingly, we do have a tool which I'm particularly keen on as taking further. So a great opportunity to talk about it. Called SQL Data Refresh. It used to be called SQL Data Masker. Has anybody tried it in the room? It's out as an early access. Oh,
Grant, you don't count.
So that's out as an early access. It actually came about as part of Redgate have these down tools weeks where all of the developers get to spend a week working on whatever they like. But we do this sort of 4 times a year. And SQL Data Refresh came out of one of those. And I was on the team. But yeah, so that's definitely a problem that we're very aware of. And we're going to be trying to improve that tool and integrate it more with this story as well. So, yeah, that's useful feedback. Thanks.
We've got about 3 minutes. Anybody, any additional? Here we go.
I have a quick one.
Sure.
I'm starting down the route of color blindness. The amber to green is kind of hard to see.
Sure,
As you
sure.
develop again, if you have a different shape or allow for color scheme changes.
That's really useful feedback. Yeah, we'll do that. Thank you.
Thanks. Actually, Microsoft, when they're testing, because they have to test for even blind users. And Buck, how many of you guys know who Buck Woody is? Yeah, Buck actually used to have to sit down with a blind user, and they had to be able to walk through and work SQL Server Management Studio, not being able to see anything. I wouldn't have the patience for that, but I thought it was amazing. Sir, you had a question.
Have you tried doing any click-once deployments or anything through this? We have several click-once applications, and one of the things that I can think, and I'm not sure that this is a problem that's in your realm, it might be more just specific to click-once, is the reliance on previous versions. So for example, click once, you can check to see if a previous version has to be installed or anything like that. I just didn't see any mention of click once in your...
It's not something honestly we've really been looking at the moment, but it's useful feedback. We'll have a look. Thanks.
You know, this side of the room has been asking a lot of good questions. How about over there? Any other good questions?
Bad
Yeah, no, bad questions. Well, Justin, you want to start to wrap up, and I'll come up.
Yeah, sure. So there's also, in addition to the deployment manager white paper, there's also a white paper for the session that you didn't get to attend because it was at the same time. So that's on continuous integration with databases. So if you've got, it's actually got a grey background rather than the white background. The white background is the automated deployment one. So make sure you've got both of those. And to summarise, hopefully we've seen that automating deployments can make life a hell of a lot easier. The PowerShell and new Redgate tool can help, and that and I should let you know there's a free early access version of Deployment Manager available on our website at redgate.com/dm. So please try it. Let us know what you think. Any feedback, let us know. We're really keen to get your thoughts. Great.
We're at the end of our time, so thank you every one of you for coming, and I really appreciate all of you. Great questions. Thank you so much.
There is, yeah. Yeah, if you just Google for it, or search on the Redgate website, you should find it pretty easy. Sure. Yeah. Okay. So the way it works, shall I pack up and come down and we can have a quick chat? So yeah, we'll be right down.
Mm-hmm.